going to talk in general about this question of the persevering humanity of oppressed people and the foundation of civility, compassion, community, and progressive reasoning. We've been talking today. I'll go back to our first speaker who talked about this impulse toward the shared hand or communal economics. And what we're asking is, what is the true impulse for economic democracy? And to talk about it today, I'm going to use two N words. The first N word is necessity, and the second one is neo-humanism. So the two impulses for, initially, we can think historically, the impulse for communal economics was necessity. Basically, there was a time when individuals, next on the slideshow. So there was a time when by necessity, people decided to work together toward an equitable sharing of the wealth that was available. It was necessity. And over time, through the development of technologies, military technologies, as well as economic technologies, there came a time when certain people through military technology could take what they wanted, or through economic technologies could accumulate. And so the necessity for communal economics or the shared hand faded away. And we began to develop feudalism and the types of societies that evolved eventually into capitalism. In this particular picture here, we can see where the persevering humanity of the oppressed people, which is really the very value that oppressors exploit. They don't just exploit the backs of workers, it's their capacity for economic cooperation among themselves, which is really the value that they extract. And when that value is taken back, as you can see, this is a picture of Gandhi's salt protest. Now, basically, you had the colonial government taking the value of their economic capacity, extracting it, and when they decided to take back the value of their economic humanity by producing their own salt, then that was a revolutionary action. And in general, that's a revolutionary action, and that's the kind of action that eventually leads to economic democracy. Next. In general, we can say humanity is a state and activity that promotes connectedness of human beings. Dr. King says it really boils down to this, that our life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Now, as long as we know in our hearts that this is true, then even without necessity, we might have an impulse toward economic democracy. But in the absence of such sentiments, next please, in the absence of such sentiments such as P.R. Sarkar also reiterates here, no one is totally independent. Everyone makes up for their deficiencies by taking help from others. Whenever a large group of people strive to make up for their relative differences in terms of mutual understanding, we call it a society. And so, historically, in the absence of these sentiments and the fading of the necessity for communal economics, we begin to have these systems of oppression that we see today. Next, please. And then we can see the next few slides are just talking about the consequences of the fading away of this sense of necessity for communal economics as oppressive societies develops, which of course is eventually the commodification of family and householding. Next, please. And of course, that commodification, the role of it was for development of private property. And P.R. Sarkar says, like light, air, and water, all the mundane resources of the universe are the common property of everyone, and no property is the personal or paternal property of anyone. All natural resources are meant to be used for collective welfare. And so basically what we have, again, these sentiments that say, even beyond necessity, we should have reasons to move toward communal economics or economic democracy. but we see that we don't. So what does it require? If you don't have necessity, then to move into a world where economic democracy evolves, you then need neo-humanism. You need a sentiment, a picture of humanity that allows this impulse toward economic democracy. Next one. This picture is just showing you that as regards to oppressive exploitation, as I said before, we're not meant to be beasts of burden. The point is to subjugate our humanity. Now, there does come a time, and this is a time that we are fast approaching, when our humanity, our capacity to collaborate and to produce for the oppressors become less and less a necessity. As we get toward robotics and large language models, we have seen that the evolution of technology has moved us more and more toward a time where we are less and less necessary. And in the absence of that necessity, oppressors turn more and more to barbarism. We can see whenever the labor of oppressed people is not the goal of oppressors, then you have barbaric responses. The Native Americans, they wanted their land, and so you had basically a genocide in this country. You have now a similar thing going on in Gaza, because again, people are not seeking to exploit the humanity of those individuals, but to take from them what they have. Next, please. And the thing about this, of course, even when they are exploiting our preserved humanity, that very process itself devalues that very humanity. And someone asked a question earlier about education and its need in political democracy as well as economic democracy. Well, the process of oppression and being alienated from the means of production, it itself creates ignorance. But when you're not alienated from the means of production, throughout history, people didn't need to be educated to become better and better at providing for themselves, as long as they were not alienated from the means of production. So being more and more alienated from the means of production, you become less and less able to make decisions about how to best evolve those circumstances. And next, please. And so basically we have a situation where how does neo-humanism emerge? And I will say that another teacher of mine besides P.R. Sakar is a man by the name of Rudolf Steiner, because I'm a Waldorf teacher. He talked about what does it mean for human beings to mature. And we had earlier speaker talking about becoming an adult. To become an adult, you basically have to have 4 perceptive capacities. You have to be able to perceive the inner life of the other. And then you might think, oh, that's something easy, but it's not true. Some people do not perceive that others have an inner life. You have to perceive that the expression of that inner life, in it, there's shared meaning. And you also have to perceive that the other is a unique individuality reflective of who you are. And last but not least, you have to be able to perceive that thought and virtue are something that truly exists in the world. With those capacities, you then have the ability to be an adult. And in Waldorf education, those are actually the 4 goals. We educate the children toward those 4 goals, to have those perceptual capacities. In the absence of those perceptual capacities, you cannot become an adult. With those capacities, neo-humanism, this capacity to know that we are not only one people across the differences, that we are one people that are given our capacities and livelihood by Mother Earth. And that all aspects of Mother Earth, plant, animal, and mineral are a part of the system that sustains us. And in neo-humanism, you recognize that common kinship. And those emerge out of these 4 capacities. Next, please. Now, again, these don't automatically come into existence because oppression is generalized trauma. And as it says here, this particular woman who was doing this research on these 4 capacities, oppression is generalized trauma, and as producers of adverse childhood events, interrupts natural pleasure and maturation such that the above outlined four perceptual capacities of Steiner's are compromised for adults and children. So we are dealing with, the circumstances of oppression that, and P.R. Sarkar talks about this too, the effect of oppression on our capacity to understand ourselves as economic beings who can work together and cooperate as we found ourselves doing by necessity. And in this age, we have to do more than by necessity. We have to find this inner impulse of neo-humanism to move forward into a new era of economic democracy that's sure at hand. Next, please. Now, with these four capacities of that lead to neo-humanism, this other capacity of reason can then have mooring, have a foundation. Reason is not something that initially necessarily lends itself to the good. As studies have shown, I'll just read this last one after pointing out that yes, sometimes we use reason to understand the world, but we also use reason to advance various proximal ends. But in the main, we do it to overwrite the beliefs and desires of others, to get others to think like us. So without neo-humanism guiding and these four perceptual capacities that lead to compassion and lead to community, reason, as we see, there's some progressive radio shows, they give so much time to BS. Should be obviously recognized as immoral and as not really have anything to do with the well-being of all people, and in an attempt to be objective. Reason is so much abused for the ends oppression that it has to be fueled, motivated by neo-humanism if it's going to be a part of the evolution of economic democracy. Next, please. Now, I'm going to kind of cut my presentation a little bit short here, but the next part of my presentation will be how do we achieve social renewal. I'm going to briefly talk about what can emerge out of neo-humanism. I think there's three principles that we all know. We've heard of them: liberty, equality, and fraternity. We've heard about those from the French Revolution and forward. Now, how does economic democracy evolve out of neo-humanism? Well, if you look at those three principles, liberty, equality, and fraternity, which I think, are natural impulses out of neo-humanism, those three can inform our political, cultural, and economic raise in such a way that you can develop a cycle of human culture that then can lead to economic democracy in the shared hand in the sense that was talked about earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show people what I have here next. So this little diagram here shows how these three principles, if you start here with liberty, liberty requires what capital? And we talked about it earlier. It requires leisure. Rather than creating more profit for capitalists, we need to create leisure for working people. Out of that leisure, then you have the ability for people out of their own, what they own is their individual experiences, their talents, and their intelligence to create true art and invention. And the value of those being the merit of those. Now, what happens with those is that you go down into fraternity. And fraternity is the foundation for economic democracy, really. Fraternity really means that everyone should have access to art and invention and access to natural resources which are not owned by anyone for the purposes of bringing new means into the world that can increase productivity. And out of those new means, you have this access to the means of production, which can lead in P.R. Sarkar's picture to initial commodities that have value based on the interest that can then inform new productive capacity. And that new productive capacity then is integrated in the political sphere by everybody having equality of education and information and the basic necessities. Those are integrated, and then new liberty and new leisure is created. And so, and just to summarize, my idea is that Out of that persevering humanity of the oppressed, you have this natural impulse to go beyond necessity as the motivator for communal economics, to go into neo-humanism as this motivator for economic democracy. And out of that, you can have these sentiments of liberty, equality, and fraternity that can lead to relationship to our free systems of politics, economics, and culture, that can lead to evolutionary cycles, lead to this progressive movement in a communal economy.
We have a question over here.
Can you please redefine or give examples of the persevering humanity? I'm a little puzzled. Persevering is meaning something that's kind of grinds itself and keeps going and keeps going and keeps going in spite of obstacles. So I wonder if you could get a little bit more into that.
We're just talking about what they're doing in their community to overcome food deserts, or I can take the example of enslaved people and it was their persevering humanity which made it possible to even enslave them. In the absence of that persevering humanity, they could not have. That was what was subjugated, and in their working and cooperating is why the cotton got out of the field. It's always the persevering humanity under the situation of oppression that leads to any civility or productivity. And in the absence of that persevering humanity, you get the barbarism of the oppressor. That persevering humanity showing up now. Anytime you have solidarity movements are the persevering humanity of the oppressed people trying to take back the benefits of their own humanity. So that's basically how the persevering humanity works. Out of that persevering humanity, first you're giving away the benefits, and then you develop solidarity, which allows you to start taking back the benefits of that persevering humanity.
Thank you. Very well stated. We're out of time.